Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're talking teams, code, and how to make those two play nice, without feeling like we're building a rocket ship with a bicycle assembly line.
Yeah, it's a struggle I've seen all too often.
And that's where service per team comes in, right? This idea of aligning your team structure with your code base for, like, maximum impact. We're diving into Chris Richardson's Microservices.io for this one.
A fantastic resource. Really lays the groundwork.
Yeah, it's like our blueprint for building systems that are agile, powerful, the whole nine yards.
And maybe a little less headache-inducing along the way.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Less time debugging, more time building awesome stuff. So picture this. You've got a crack team of, say, 5, maybe 9 developers, not some massive corporation, but a tight-knit unit. They've got a shared mission.
This is where that idea of cognitive capacity comes into play, right? Richardson talks about how a team's code base shouldn't be bigger than what they can wrap their heads around collectively.
Or it's got to be manageable.
Exactly. It's not just about dividing the work. It's about making sure each team really owns their part. Minimizing those dependencies that bog everyone down.
Ugh, dependencies. Like trying to run a sprint race in quicksand.
Exactly. And that's where service per team shines. Each team gets their own little piece of the puzzle. Usually that ends up being a single microservice.
Like their own little domain, their own sandbox to play in.
I like that, a sandbox. They get to build it, maintain it, really nurture it.
And because it's their sandbox, they can make changes faster, right? Without worrying about breaking something in someone else's.
Yeah, exactly. They can experiment, iterate, push updates, all without being chained to another team's timeline. Richardson talks about this a lot, the improvements in speed and agility.
It's like having that small startup vibe, but with, the resources and backing of a larger company. Best of both worlds. But, okay, the article did mention that sometimes a team might need to handle more than one service. When would that happen? And how do you even keep things from turning into a tangled mess?
Right, yeah. It's definitely not the default mode. Richardson actually cautions against that, only when it really makes sense, like if it's going to drastically improve the lead time or maybe bring a massive boost in scalability.
So you wouldn't just jump into that, right? It's got to be strategic.
Exactly. But what about those times when you have features that require collaboration between services? Does this whole one team, one sandbox thing create new bottlenecks?
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, and it's a great question. It brings us to one of the most important parts of this whole pattern, API design.
The glue that holds it all together.
Exactly. So even though each team is responsible for their own service, those services need to talk to each other. They have to, right? It's like a jazz band.
Oh, like that.
Each musician needs to understand the other instruments, the rhythm, the harmony of it all.
And in this case, the sheet music is a well-designed API.
Exactly. It's like a contract between services. It ensures that they can share information, work together without stepping on each other's toes, even when they're built by totally different teams.
So it's like a universal language for your microservices. Makes sense.
Right. It's all about communication. These teams might be autonomous, but they're still working towards the same goal, building a great product. Which actually makes me think, we've been talking a lot about the benefits for developers, but how does this impact the end users? They're the ones who matter most, right?
Totally. At the end of the day, users don't care about our fancy microservices. They care about the experience.
Exactly. And service per team might not dictate the UI or anything, but it impacts the user experience in a roundabout way. Think about it. Faster development cycles, more agility, the ability to iterate quickly, those all add up, right?
Yeah, it all trickles down.
If a team can push updates to their service without jumping through hoops, it means bug fixes go out faster, new features get released sooner, the whole product feels snappier, more responsive.
It's like the difference between a clunky website from the 90s and a modern app that's smooth as butter. Way better than dial-up, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But, it makes you think. At the beginning, we were talking about how service per team helps align teams and code. Is there like a Conway's Law thing happening here? That whole idea that the structure of the organization influences the systems they build?
Oh, totally. It's like service per team was designed with Conway's Law in mind. Instead of just letting the org chart dictate a messy code base, you're being intentional about it.
Flipping the script?
Exactly. Designing your teams to naturally create a better architecture, something more modular, maintainable.
So we're coding the organizational structure to get better software.
Exactly. And the best part is it creates this loop, right? Teams are set up to support a good architecture, and that architecture makes the teams more effective. It's self-reinforcing.
It's like form follows function. But in this case, code follows team.
You got it. And what you end up with is a system that's easier to understand, easier to maintain, easier to evolve. All good things.
It's less of a technical pattern and more like a philosophy, building better teams to build better software.
Any parting words of wisdom for our listeners before we wrap up?
If you want a development process that's adaptable, scalable, and honestly more enjoyable, service per team is worth checking out. Just remember to keep those teams small and focused, communication is key, and never forget the user. You'd be surprised what you can achieve.
Great advice. And for our listeners, if you want to go deeper on this, and I think you will, check out the full article over at microservices.io. Until next time, happy coding. You can now follow Code Impact Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and other podcast networks.